Every single morning the sun rises. We take it for granted. It's the most reliable constant in our lives. The silent promise that the world hasn't ended while we slept. But what if it wasn't a promise? What if every sunrise was a hard-won victory? The result of a desperate, violent battle fought just hours before, in a realm of absolute darkness, against an enemy that can never truly be killed. An enemy that represents the end of everything. This isn't a forgotten fairy tale. For one of the greatest civilizations in human history, this was the terrifying fundamental truth of the universe. They believed our existence, our reality, was defended every single night from a cosmic serpent of pure, unmaking chaos. A creature known as Apep. And there was one night, one horrifying moment recorded in their most sacred texts, when Apep almost won. The question that haunted them and should haunt us is what happened on that night? And what does it mean for a monster that can't die to be beaten, but never defeated? To the ancient Egyptians, the universe wasn't born from nothing. It was born from something they called the New, a dark, watery, infinite abyss of chaos. Before time, before light, before the gods, there was only the New. And from this primordial chaos, creation emerged. An island of order in an endless ocean of entropy. This order was a concept they called Ma'at. Ma'at is more than just a goddess with a feather on her head. It's the universal principle of truth, balance, justice, and cosmic harmony. It's the force that makes the stars move in their predictable courses, the Nile flood its banks to nourish the land, and the sun rise each day. Ma'at is the operating system of reality, and Apep is the virus designed to crash it. He is the backlash of creation, the chaos that was pushed aside to make room for the universe, now given a monstrous, malevolent consciousness. He is the embodiment of Isfet, the opposite of Ma'at, injustice, violence, and the ultimate destruction of all that is. His goal is simple and absolute: to swallow the sun, kill the gods, and unravel the tapestry of existence until nothing remains but the cold, silent, watery abyss from which everything began. He isn't just a villain in a story. He is the metaphysical enemy of being itself. Every day, the great sun god Ra would sail his magnificent vessel, the Manjet Barque, across the sky, bringing light and life to the world of the living. But as the sun set, his journey was far from over. He would trade his dayboat for his nightboat, the Mesektet, and begin a far more perilous voyage. He had to travel through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This wasn't a simple trip. The Duat was a treacherous realm of 12 hours, or 12 gates, each guarded by fearsome demons and filled with unimaginable dangers. It was a journey of renewal, where Ra's aging form would merge with the god of the afterlife, Osiris, to be reborn young and powerful, ready to rise again at dawn. But waiting for him in the deepest, darkest hours of that journey was Apep. Imagine a serpent so colossal that its full length could never be seen at once. A creature not of flesh and blood, but of condensed darkness and cosmic rage. The Egyptians described him as being hundreds of feet long, with a head made of flint and a roar that could shake the foundations of the Duat. His very presence warped reality. He could hypnotize his victims with a terrifying gaze, trapping gods and souls in his paralyzing stare. He didn't just attack with fangs, he attacked reality itself. He would create sandbanks in the cosmic river to ground Ra's boat, or try to drink the waters dry, stranding the sun god in the darkness. His primary weapon was a disorienting, deafening roar that was meant to induce confusion and chaos among Ra's divine crew, breaking their formation and their will to fight. This confrontation wasn't a random encounter. It was a nightly appointment with oblivion. Apep's attack was as certain as the setting of the sun. He represented the fundamental law of the universe that all things tend toward disorder and decay. And every night, the forces of order had to rise up and fight back. Ra was not alone on this journey. His boat was crewed by a pantheon of the most powerful and important gods in Egypt. There was Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, who knew the spells to counter Apep's dark sorcery. There was Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky, with his keen sight to spot the serpent's approach from miles away. But the front line of defense, the champion who stood at the prow of the boat, spear in hand, was the formidable god Set. Now, if you know anything about Egyptian mythology, you might be thinking, wait, Set? Isn't he the bad guy? The god of chaos, storms, and deserts? The one who murdered his own brother, Osiris? And you would be right. Set is one of the most complex and controversial figures in the entire pantheon. He embodies the violent, untamable aspects of nature. He is a force of chaos himself. But the Egyptians understood a crucial truth. Sometimes you need to fight fire with fire. To defeat a monster of absolute chaos, you needed a god who understood chaos intimately. Only Set, with his ferocious strength and unpredictable fury, had the raw power to physically stand against Apep. While other gods used magic and strategy, Set was the divine brawler, the only one strong enough to repeatedly spear the great serpent and drive him back into the depths. The battle was a symphony of divine power. As Apep's roar echoed through the darkness, Thoth and the goddess Isis would chant powerful incantations, spells designed to weaken the serpent and protect the solar barque. The goddess Serpent, a scorpion deity, would bind the beast with her magic. Other gods would hack at its colossal coils with knives of copper and flint. And at the heart of the storm was Set, endlessly stabbing, wounding, and repelling the incarnation of cosmic doom. They would cut him, burn him, and dismember him, but they could never ever kill him, because you cannot kill a concept. You cannot kill the void. Apep is not a creature that lives. He is the principle of non-existence. The moment he is defeated and his wounded form sinks back into the dark waters of the Duat, he begins to reform. He is the universe's eternal shadow, an inescapable part of reality. The victory was never permanent. It was a stay of execution, a temporary reprieve that lasted only until the next sunset. This nightly battle was more than just a myth. It was the Egyptian explanation for natural phenomena that terrified them. A solar eclipse wasn't an astronomical alignment. It was Apep succeeding briefly in swallowing the sunboat during the day. The world would plunge into an unnatural darkness, and the people of Egypt would bang pots, pans, and drums, screaming and shouting, doing everything in their power to make enough noise to frighten the serpent and help the gods force him to spit Ra back out. Storms and earthquakes were seen as the physical manifestation of Apep's rage, shaking the foundations of the world. He was the answer to the eternal question, why do bad things happen? Because chaos is always there, always pushing against the fragile walls of order. Priests on Earth played a vital role in this cosmic war. They weren't just praying. They were actively engaged in magical combat. In temples across Egypt, they would perform nightly rituals to aid the gods. They would create effigies of Apep out of wax or papyrus, then they would curse them, spit on them, stab them with knives, and finally burn them in a fire. They believed these sympathetic magic rituals, performed on Earth, had a real, tangible effect in the Duat, lending their power to Ra and weakening the great serpent. They even had books filled with spells against him, with titles like the Book of Overthrowing Apep. One particularly graphic spell involved drawing Apep in green ink on a new piece of papyrus, wrapping it around a wax model of the serpent, and then slowly burning it while cursing his name, a ritual designed to inflict maximum pain upon the cosmic enemy. The fate of the universe, they believed, depended on their vigilance. For thousands of years, this cycle continued. Ra would journey into the dark, Apep would attack, the gods would fight him off, and the sun would rise. A victory, but a temporary one. A balance, but a terrifyingly fragile one. They knew that every single night there was a chance, no matter how small, that the gods might fail. That Set might stumble. That Apep's hypnotic gaze might prove too strong. And if that ever happened, the sun would not rise. The world would grow cold. The stars would fall from the sky. And the dark, chaotic waters of the new would rise up and swallow creation whole, returning everything to the silent, lifeless void it came from. It was the ultimate cosmic horror story, played out every 24 hours. And they had records, chilling accounts from a time of national crisis, of a night when the battle went horribly wrong, when the forces of chaos nearly broke the world for good. A night that proved their greatest fears were not just myths, but a razor's edge away from becoming reality. To understand this night, you have to understand a fundamental truth of the ancient Egyptian mind. As above, so below. The world they lived in was a direct mirror of the divine. A perfect flood of the Nile, bountiful harvests, and a strong pharaoh on the throne meant that in the heavens, the gods were victorious. Order or Ma'at reigned supreme. But when the Nile failed, when famine stalked the land, when civil war tore the two lands apart and foreign invaders marched across the sacred soil, that could only mean one thing. Up there, in the unseen realm of the Duat, the underworld, the gods were losing. Chaos, Isfet, was winning. And the ultimate embodiment of that chaos, the source of all cosmic disorder, had a name. Apep. He wasn't a god in the way we think of one. He wasn't worshipped. No temples were ever built in his name. No offerings were made to appease him. You cannot appease a hurricane. You cannot bargain with an earthquake. Apep was not a deity to be placated. He was a cosmic threat to be annihilated every single night without fail. He was the antithesis of creation itself. While the sun god Ra was the lord of light, life and order, Apep was the personification of darkness, non-existence, and the terrifying churning chaos that existed before the world was ever made. The Egyptians believed that in the beginning, there was only the new, an infinite, dark, watery abyss. It was from these primordial waters that the first god, Adam, willed himself into existence, and from him all of creation unfolded. But the new never truly went away. It remained at the edges of the universe, a constant, threatening reminder of the nothingness from which everything came. And from that same primordial sludge, Apep also emerged. Some myths say he was born from Ra's own umbilical cord as it was severed at his birth, a shadow cast by the very first light. This makes him Ra's twisted twin, forever bound to him, an inherent flaw in the system of creation. Other stories claim he was spat out by the creator goddess Neith, an accidental and malevolent byproduct of her divine expectoration. The details were less important than the terrifying truth they all pointed to. Apep was not an invader from some other dimension. He was a native part of their cosmos, a fundamental force of nature, as essential to the universe as creation itself, but one whose sole purpose was to unmake it. This is what makes him so much more horrifying than a simple villain. Apep didn't want to rule the world. He didn't want to enslave humanity or overthrow the gods to sit on a celestial throne. His goal was far more absolute. He wanted to devour the sun, kill the gods, and drag all of existence back into the silent, lifeless black water of the new. He was the universe's self-destruct sequence, a cosmic reset button. His victory wouldn't mean a new dark age. It would mean the end of age itself, the end of time, space, and consciousness. And so, every single night, the stage was set for the most important battle in history. When Ra the sun set in the west, he didn't just disappear. He boarded his divine vessel, the Manjet or the night Barque, and began a perilous 12-hour journey through the Egyptian underworld, the Duat. This wasn't a peaceful cruise. The Duat was a realm of demons, trials, and gateways, each hour of the night representing a different, dangerous region that had to be navigated. It was a journey of regeneration, where Ra would merge with the god of the dead, Osiris, to be reborn renewed, ready to rise in the east as the morning sun Khepri. This cycle was the engine of the universe. It was what made the crops grow, the Nile flow, and the world turn. It was Ma'at in motion. But lurking in the darkest depths of the Duat, Apep was waiting. He was often depicted as a colossal serpent, miles long, his body a series of winding coils that could encircle the world. His scales were said to be as hard as flint, and his roar could shake the foundations of the underworld. He didn't just attack the boat with brute force. He was the master of Isfet, of chaos. He could create sandbanks in the subterranean river to ground Ra's Barque. He could vomit forth legions of lesser demons, fiends of chaos, to swarm the divine crew. He was a being of pure anti-energy, whose very presence warped the reality around him. The Egyptians called him the encircler of the world, and the enemy of Ra, but one of his most chilling titles was the Eater of Souls. His goal wasn't just to kill the gods physically, but to obliterate their very essence, to unwrite their existence from the fabric of the cosmos. And if he succeeded, if he managed to stop the solar bark and swallow Ra, the consequences were unthinkable. The sun would not rise. The light would fail. The world would be plunged into eternal darkness, and without the ordering power of Ra, the laws of nature would unravel. The stars would fall from the sky, the ground would crumble, and the primordial waters of chaos would rush back in, drowning creation in an infinite, silent ocean. Every tremor of the earth, every eclipse that darkened the sky, every sandstorm that blotted out the sun was seen as a near miss, a sign that Apep had come terrifyingly close to succeeding. The priests in their temples on the banks of the Nile weren't just praying. They were performing vital rituals, magical spells that they believed directly aided the gods in the fight. They would chant curses against Apep, create wax figures of the serpent and ritually destroy them, spearing them, burning them, dismembering them, all to magically transmit that same destruction to the real serpent in the Duat. The entire nation's spiritual and magical might was a weapon aimed at this one nightly foe. Their survival, and the survival of the entire world, depended on it. Ra, however, did not travel alone. He was the Sun King, the divine pharaoh, and he was protected by a formidable crew of the most powerful gods and goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. They were the defenders of creation, the guardians of the light. Each one was chosen for their specific skills, their unique powers, forming a divine special forces unit for this cosmic war. They were the last line of defense between existence and total annihilation. But even for them, this was no easy fight. Apep had a weapon that brute force couldn't stop, a power that struck not at the hull of the boat, but at the very will of the gods themselves. A terrifying, hypnotic gaze from which there was almost no escape. This gaze wasn't simple magic, not a parlor trick of a lesser demon. It was a fundamental power of the cosmos. The Egyptians called this concept Isfet, the principle of chaos, injustice, and decay. Apep didn't just wield chaos, he was chaos. And his eyes were a direct window into that oblivion. When he fixed his stare upon the Barque of a million years, he wasn't trying to control the minds of the gods. He was trying to convince them that their struggle was pointless. Imagine being on that boat. You're a deity, a being of immense power, tasked with protecting the sun itself. You fought monsters, demons, and cosmic horrors. But then you see those eyes, two malevolent spirals of darkness in the churning waters. And a thought, a cold and foreign thought, slithers into your mind. Why are we doing this? This journey is endless. The sun rises, the sun sets. We fight, we win, we do it all again tomorrow. What's the point? The universe began in darkness, and it will end in darkness. This little spark of light we're protecting, it's just a temporary inconvenience. It would be so much easier to just let go. That was the power of Apep's gaze. It was the ultimate weapon of entropy. It didn't attack your body. It attacked your reason for being. The lesser gods on the boat, the divine crew who rowed the mighty vessel, were the first to succumb. Their oars would slow, their arms would feel like lead. Their divine minds, usually filled with purpose, would cloud over with a thick gray fog of absolute despair. They wouldn't scream or fight. They would simply stop, their heads slumping forward, their spirits utterly broken. The light from Ra's own form would begin to flicker, to dim, as the very concept of order that he represented was being assaulted. Even the great protectors were not immune. Thoth, the god of wisdom, would find his knowledge turning to ash, his spells and incantations feeling like meaningless babble. Batet, the fierce feline goddess, would feel her hunter's instinct curdle into fear, her claws refusing to extend. The entire divine entourage, the greatest champions of creation, would be paralyzed by a wave of cosmic hopelessness. The boat would slow to a drift, dead in the water, surrounded by the crushing darkness of the underworld, about to be swallowed by the serpent whose very presence made existence feel like a burden. So how do you fight a stare that can unmake reality? How do you attack an enemy whose greatest weapon is the truth of universal decay? You can't use a spear. You can't use a spell. You need a force that is just as primal, just as chaotic, but pointed in the opposite direction. You need a god who looks into the abyss of chaos and isn't frightened by it, but instead sees a reflection. And that is why Set stood at the prow of the boat. Set, the god of deserts, storms, and violence. The god who murdered his own brother Osiris. The outcast, the villain. The one who represented everything disruptive and untamable. To many, he was an enemy of order. But here, in the deepest part of the Duat, his nature was not a weakness. It was the ultimate weapon. Set was a god of chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos. It was the chaos of the raging thunderstorm, the violence of the shifting sands, the fury of a warrior. While Apep's chaos was passive, entropic, a slow slide into nothingness, Set's chaos was active, violent, and full of a terrible burning energy. He was immune to Apep's gaze because he had no grand, orderly purpose to be corrupted. His purpose was the struggle itself. He didn't fight for a perfect world. He fought because fighting was his nature. The despair that crippled the other gods found no purchase in his mind. The pointlessness of the struggle? To Set, the struggle was the point. And so, as the other gods faltered, their wills dissolving, Set would step forward, his red eyes glowing like hot coals in the gloom. He would raise his spear, not to throw it, but as a declaration. He would lock eyes with the great serpent. He stared into the void, and the void stared back. But in Set, the void found its match. It found a will forged not in creation and order, but in destruction and conflict. Set didn't try to reason with the chaos or shield himself from it. He met it head-on. He unleashed his own nature, his own violent essence as a weapon. And then he would let out a roar. This wasn't just a sound. The ancient texts describe it as a noise that split the sky, a sound that could shake the foundations of the underworld. It was the shriek of a desert wind, the crash of thunder, and the grinding of tectonic plates all at once. It was a raw, unfiltered blast of violent energy that ripped through the psychic oppression of Apep's gaze. It was an assertion. It was Set screaming into the void, "I am here!" And the sheer force of his violent will was enough to shatter the spell. Suddenly, the other gods would gasp, as if waking from a nightmare. The fog would lift from their minds. Thoth's spells would return to his tongue, Bastet's claws would unsheath, and the crew would grip their oars with renewed determination. The light of Ra would flare back to its full brilliant intensity. Set's chaotic roar had broken Apep's chaotic silence, reminding them that even in the face of oblivion, the will to act, to fight, to simply exist, was a power in itself. The hypnotic attack was broken. The first, and perhaps most dangerous, of Apep's weapons had been neutralized. Now the physical battle could begin. Spears forged from iron, a metal the Egyptians associated with Set and the heavens, would be hurled at the serpent's massive hide. The gods would unleash their divine powers, striking at the beast from the deck of the solar barque. They were back in the fight, their resolve hardened by the brush with non-existence. But Apep was the embodiment of chaos, and chaos is never predictable. It doesn't rely on a single trick. Defeating his gaze didn't mean defeating him. As the gods rallied and the boat surged forward, a new threat emerged, one that was just as insidious. The serpent, realizing its psychological assault had failed, changed tactics. It didn't just attack the boat, it attacked the very path the boat sailed upon. Suddenly, the smooth, rhythmic progress of the barque of Ra came to a sickening, grinding halt. The crew was thrown forward, the gods stumbled. The river beneath them, the very waterway that carried them through the underworld, was gone. Apep, in a display of terrifying power, had created a sandbank in the middle of the river of darkness, or in some versions, he had literally drunk a section of the river dry, leaving the boat of the sun god stranded, beached on the shores of oblivion. They were trapped. The serpent's massive coils began to tighten around them, not in the water, but on the dead dry land of the underworld. Their greatest strength, their divine vessel, was now their prison. The silence was the first sign of true damnation. Aboard the solar barque, the gods were used to the hiss of water, the celestial hum of their vessel gliding through the liquid darkness of the Duat. But now there was nothing. Only the grating sound of divine keel on dead sand and the dry, rasping breath of the deities trapped aboard. The air tasted of dust and millennia-old decay. Outside, the world wasn't black. It was an absence of color, an absence of life, a void that swallowed light itself. They were aground in the deepest, most desolate region of the underworld, a place where even souls feared to tread. And from the suffocating gloom, a shadow detached itself from the greater darkness. It wasn't a shadow, it was a mountain range moving. 2 points of cold, dead light ignited in the distance, stars of pure malevolence. Apep. He didn't need to rush. He had them. The serpent's form was so immense it defied geometry. His scales were the size of shields, each one a swirling vortex of anti-creation. He uncoiled slowly, deliberately, the sound of his movement not a hiss, but the grinding of tectonic plates. This wasn't just a predator approaching its prey. This was an equation of cosmic annihilation finally being solved. Aboard the ship, panic gave way to grim resolve. This was it. The final battle, repeated for eternity, but this time the board was tilted. Ra, the source of all light, seemed diminished here, his golden radiance flickering like a candle in a gale. He was the sun, but this was a land where the sun had never shone. He was old, ancient beyond measure, and in this moment of supreme crisis, his age was a palpable weight. But he was not alone. Stepping to the prow of the ship, one god stood in stark defiance, his form a silhouette of raw, brutal power against the encroaching void. Set, the god of deserts, of storms, of chaos itself. Many on the boat distrusted him, even feared him. He was a betrayer, a kinslayer, the embodiment of violence. But here, in the heart of uncreation, his nature was not a flaw, it was a weapon. Chaos cannot be fought with pure order, it must be met with a chaos of its own. Set held a spear forged from meteorite iron, its tip glowing with a violent, angry light. He was not defending order because he loved it. He was defending reality because it was the only arena chaotic enough for him to exist. Apep's brand of chaos was different. It was the chaos of the blank page, of absolute nothingness. And for Set, a being of passion and fury, nothingness was the only true enemy. "He comes for your father." A voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension. It was Horus. His falcon eyes, which could see a mouse twitch from a mile high in the living world, were narrowed, focused solely on the approaching threat. He stood beside the throne of Ra, a living shield. Isis, the great magician, stood with her arms outstretched, her fingers weaving intricate patterns in the dead air. Spells of protection, wards of binding, ancient words of power began to shimmer around the Barque, a fragile dome of light against the all-consuming dark. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, was not preparing for a fight. His mind was the battlefield. He frantically scanned the patterns of Apep's scales, the rhythm of his advance, searching for a flaw, a weakness, a forgotten piece of lore that could grant them a sliver of a chance. Apep let out a roar. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, because there was no air to travel through. It was a vibration that shook the very foundations of their divine forms, a sonic disruption that sought to unravel the logic of their existence. The protective wards woven by Isis flickered and died, shattered like glass. The light of Set's spear dimmed. For a moment, every god on that boat felt their own essence begin to fray, their memories thinning, their purpose dissolving. This was Apep's power. Not just to kill the body, but to unmake the soul. Then came the gaze. Those two cold stars, those dead eyes fixed upon them. It wasn't a look of anger or hunger. It was a look of profound cosmic indifference. The look of the void staring back at a brief, meaningless flicker of light. And it held them. One by one the gods froze. Geb, the earth god, felt the sand beneath the ship turn to lead, rooting him to the spot. Shu, the god of air, found his lungs could neither draw in nor expel. Horus, the ever-watchful, found his gaze locked, his body paralyzed. They were statues on a ship of the dead. All of them, all but one. Set roared back. His was the fury of the sandstorm, the violence of the hurricane. It was a sound of pure, untamed existence, a defiant scream against the silence. And it was just enough to break the spell upon himself. He lunged. Not from the ship, but into the very fabric of the underworld. He didn't run on the sand. He willed it to be solid beneath his feet, charging across the chasm of darkness that separated the boat from the Serpent. He was an insect charging a mountain. Apep barely seemed to notice him, his attention still focused on paralyzing the true prize. Ra, the Serpent's head, larger than any temple in Egypt, lowered towards the stranded vessel. His mouth opened, a cavern of obsidian teeth, ready to swallow the sun and plunge all of creation into eternal night. Set drove his spear forward. The iron tip, glowing once more with his rage, struck a scale on Apep's flank. The sound was not of metal on flesh, but of a hammer striking a continent. A spiderweb of cracks appeared on the massive scale, and a substance like liquid night oozed from the wound. Apep flinched. For the first time, he registered the gnat buzzing at his side. He turned his head, a movement that displaced reality itself, and his gaze fell upon Set. The full, undivided attention of the Serpent of Chaos was a force beyond comprehension. Set felt his mind being crushed, his divine energy siphoned away into the cold emptiness of Apep's being. His muscles locked, the spear felt impossibly heavy. He was failing, but his defiance had bought a crucial second. On the boat, Isis, freed from the generalized gaze, acted. She didn't chant a spell of attack. She chanted a spell of reflection. She raised her hands, and a small perfect mirror of polished silver appeared in the air before Ra. It was no bigger than her hand, a tiny, insignificant thing in this monstrous darkness. As Apep's paralyzing stare moved from Set to refocus on the sun god, it struck the mirror first. The power of the void, the soul-crushing emptiness of that gaze, was thrown back. It struck Apep directly between his own eyes. The Serpent recoiled, not in pain but in sheer unadulterated shock. For an infinitesimal moment, Apep had seen what he showed others, the reflection of absolute nothing. He saw himself, a being of pure negation, and the paradox was so profound it stunned him. He let out a shriek that cracked the very ground of the underworld, a sound of confusion and rage. The spell was broken. The gods on the barque could move, and now there was no hesitation. Horus launched himself into the air, his form blurring as he became a diving falcon of righteous fury, his talons aimed at Apep's eyes. Thoth shouted an incantation, a single perfect word that exploited the momentary weakness in Apep's conceptual defense, causing his scales to lose their impossible durability. Isis unleashed a torrent of spells, chains of pure light that wrapped around the serpent's jaw, trying to wrench it shut. The other gods added their power, a desperate, combined assault against the staggered god of chaos. And Set, freed from the gaze, found his strength renewed. With a final guttural war cry, he drove his spear deeper into the crack he had made, shattering the scale and piercing the unholy flesh beneath. Apep thrashed, his coils leveling hills of dead dust and carving canyons in the underworld floor. The sheer force of his movement threw the gods back, sending them tumbling across the sand. The serpent, wounded and disoriented, began to retreat. He wasn't defeated, not even close. But the element of surprise was gone. The perfect trap had been sprung. He slithered back into the deeper darkness, his massive form dissolving into the gloom from whence it came. His malevolent eyes were the last to fade, carrying a silent promise that this was not over. Silence returned. The gods picked themselves up, their bodies aching, their spirits drained. They had survived, but a quick look around confirmed their terror. The battle had driven them further aground. Apep was gone for now, but the barque of a million years was still hopelessly, utterly stuck. And the night was far from over. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It pressed in on them, a physical weight in the starless dark of the Duat. The only light came from the barque itself, a lonely island of gold and divinity in an ocean of black. Ra, slumped on his throne, was a flickering ember. His light, the very source of creation, was dimmed, his divine energy spent in the desperate defense against Apep. Set stood at the prow, his spear still in hand, his knuckles white. His chest heaved, not just from exhaustion, but from a burning, frustrated rage. He had driven the serpent back, yes, but at what cost? He glared out into the oppressive gloom, as if he could incinerate the darkness with his gaze alone. The barque of a million years, the vessel of eternity, was beached on the shores of non-existence. The keel was dug deep into a bank of fine, black sand that seemed to drink the light from the ship, pulling it into its depths. This wasn't the sand of any desert on Earth. It was the sediment of forgotten dreams and dissolved realities, the very antithesis of creation. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, walked to the edge of the deck, his long beak pointing down at the shore. He knelt, his movements precise and careful, and peered over the side. The hull of the barque, forged from pure sunlight and woven with spells of unmaking, was tarnishing. Where it touched the sand, the divine gold seemed to flake away, not like rust, but like it was being unwritten from existence. The sand was actively draining the boat of its conceptual reality. This was a danger more insidious than Apep's fangs. The serpent was a physical threat, a being of immense power they could fight. This was a slow, creeping dissolution, a quiet entropy. If they remained stuck, the barque would simply cease to be, its divine essence absorbed into the nothingness of the Duat's shore. They would be stranded, their light extinguished, and the sun would never rise again. Every god on that vessel understood this without a word being spoken. The air crackled with a new kind of fear, a quiet, intellectual dread that was far more chilling than the roaring chaos of battle. Isis moved to Ra's side, her hands glowing with a soft, healing light as she tried to restore the sun god's strength. But it was like pouring water into a cracked vessel. The energy she gave him seemed to leak away into the oppressive atmosphere of this dead land. "We cannot stay here," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper that carried across the silent deck. "The longer we remain, the more of our divinity this place will consume." Set slammed the butt of his spear against the deck. The sound was a sharp crack in the profound silence. "Then we push. We are gods. We will drag this vessel back into the river with our bare hands if we must." He moved to the railing, ready to leap onto the shore of unbeing, but Thoth rose and put a hand on his arm. "No," Thoth said, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to Set's fury. "To touch that shore is to invite your own unmaking. That is not sand. It is the dust of Isfet, the physical manifestation of chaos. It does not obey the laws of physics. It obeys the law of dissolution. Your strength is useless against it. So we do nothing?" Set snarled, turning to face the god of knowledge. We sit here and wait to be erased? I drove off the great serpent. I will not be undone by dirt. It is not dirt, Thoth corrected patiently. And we will not do nothing. We will do the opposite of what this land wants. You cannot fight chaos with more chaos, Set. You cannot fight entropy with brute force. That is like trying to put out a fire by throwing logs at it. This land is void of meaning. To defeat it, we must impose meaning upon it. We must assert the principle of Ma'at, of divine order, so powerfully that the chaos has no choice but to recede. Thoth walked to the center of the deck, his golden sandals making no sound. He stood before the weakened form of our great father. He began, his voice taking on a formal liturgical cadence. Your journey is the ultimate expression of Ma'at. It is the clockwork of the cosmos, the promise of dawn. We must remind this place of that truth. We must perform the ritual of reassertion. We will turn the Barque itself into a beacon of pure order, a testament to reality so potent that this shore of non-reality cannot bear its presence. A flicker of hope ignited in the eyes of the assembled gods. A ritual, a plan. It was better than blind panic or futile rage. Thoth was the keeper of sacred words, the architect of divine law. If anyone could weave a spell powerful enough to defy the nature of the Duat, it was him. He began to issue instructions. Isis, you will channel the protective magic of the throne. Horus, your sight will guide the energy. Set, your strength will not be used to push, but to anchor our reality. You will be the unshakable pillar against which the chaos breaks. All of you focus on the singular purpose of the journey. The rising sun. See it in your minds. Feel the warmth on your skin. Know with absolute certainty that it will happen. Our collective belief will be the fuel for this incantation. The gods took their positions, forming a living circuit of divine power around Ra's throne. Thoth stood at the apex, before the great sun god, and began to chant. The words that left his beak were not of any mortal tongue. They were the language of creation itself, the syllables that spun nebulae into existence and gave names to the stars. The air began to hum, vibrating with immense power. The light from the Barque intensified, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Down below, the black sand hissed. It began to churn like a pot of boiling tar, resisting the imposition of order. The divine light of the ritual struck the shore, and the sand recoiled as if burned. But it did not retreat. Instead, it rose up, forming grasping, shadowy tendrils that clawed at the boat's hull, trying to smother the light, to pull the vessel down into its formless oblivion. The Barque groaned under the strain, the timbers of reality screaming as they were pulled between the absolute order of the ritual and the absolute chaos of the shore. Set roared, planting his feet and pouring his will into the deck, his raw, violent energy becoming a shield of pure stability. Isis wove a net of shimmering hieroglyphs around the hull, each symbol a concept, life, stability, light, truth, that warred against the meaningless void. The battle was no longer against a single creature, but against a fundamental principle of the universe. It was a war of philosophy made real, a struggle between being and not being. Slowly, agonizingly, something began to shift. The grating sound of the keel against the sand lessened. The black tendrils of chaos began to dissolve under the focused onslaught of divine law. With a final, resonant syllable from Thoth that shook the very foundations of the Duat, the Barque lurched. It slid backward, inch by painful inch, away from the shore of Isfet and back toward the dark waters of the river. A collective sigh of relief, heavy with exhaustion, went through the gods as the ship finally floated free. They had done it. Thoth's wisdom had succeeded where Set's strength had failed. But the ritual had not gone unnoticed. Such a massive, concentrated burst of divine energy, of pure Ma'at, in the heart of chaos was like a lighthouse being lit in the deepest, darkest abyss. It was a declaration, a challenge, and the abyss had things swimming in it other than the great serpent. Before they could even begin to celebrate their escape, a new sound reached them from the darkness ahead. It wasn't the roar of Apep. It was a low, mournful moaning, a chorus of infinite despair. It was the sound of countless voices crying out in eternal torment. And as they peered into the gloom downriver, they saw them. Shapes began to resolve in the darkness. Not one monster, but thousands. Pale, gaunt figures wading through the black water, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their faces frozen in silent screams. They were the Mutu, the damned souls, the restless dead who had failed the judgment of Osiris. They were drawn to the light and life of the Barque like moths to a flame, their empty hearts filled with a jealous hatred for the living. They were an army of the forgotten, and they were coming for the light. Ra's Barque of a million years didn't just carry the sun, it carried the very concept of life. It was a beacon of existence in a realm of non-being. And so the damned surged forward, their forms flickering like faulty projections, their voices a dry, rustling whisper of forgotten names and abandoned hopes. They were the ultimate consequence of failure, the souls who had been devoured by Apep, the devourer of the dead. Now they existed only as echoes, driven by a singular burning need to extinguish the light they could never again possess. They swarmed the hull of the golden ship, their insubstantial hands clawing at divine wood, their touch leaving trails of cold gray dust. They were a tide of despair, attempting to drag the vessel of creation down into their own bottomless pit of oblivion. But the Barque was not undefended. This was a nightly war, and Ra's champions were always ready. At the prow stood Set, the god of storms and chaos, but here in the darkness his chaotic nature was forged into a weapon of order. His eyes, red as desert sunsets, burned with a furious light. He held a celestial spear, a weapon forged from a fallen star, and with every thrust he didn't just pierce a ghostly form. He annihilated it, erasing the echo, silencing the whisper. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a bulwark against the void. Beside him, Horus, the falcon-headed son of Osiris, wielded the authority of rightful kingship. His gaze was a physical force, a projection of divine law that caused the chaotic forms of the damned to recoil and dissipate. He was the symbol of Ma'at, of divine order, and his very presence was anathema to these broken spirits. And then there was the magic. Isis, the great enchantress, stood near the glowing form of Ra, her hands weaving spells of protection. She spoke words of power, ancient syllables that solidified the air around the Barque into an invisible, shimmering shield. The damned who touched it didn't just bounce off. They unraveled, their forms dissolving like smoke in the wind. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and knowledge, stood beside her, his mind a fortress of cosmic law. He wasn't a warrior in the same vein as Set, but his power was just as crucial. He saw the patterns in the chaos, the weaknesses in the horde's assault. He would call out warnings, direct the defenders, and counter the dark, mindless sorcery of the underworld with calculations and divine logic. The battle was not a clash of swords, but a war of concepts. The damned screamed silent curses, trying to infect the gods with their despair. They whispered of the futility of the sun's journey, of the inevitability of darkness, of the sweet relief of simply ceasing to be. They were a plague of nihilism, and the gods fought back not just with weapons but with purpose. Every parry, every spell, every defiant war cry was an affirmation of life, a declaration that existence was worth fighting for. For what felt like an eternity, the divine crew held the line. They were an unbreakable unit, a pantheon united against the encroaching nothingness. Slowly, painstakingly, they pushed the tide of the forgotten back. One by one, the ghostly figures were unmade, their whispers fading until the only sounds were the crackle of divine energy and the steady rhythmic chant of the gods. A quiet fell over the river of darkness. The immediate threat was gone, a moment of respite, but it was a false quiet, a heavy, suffocating silence. This was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence before the avalanche. The gods on the Barque felt it first. A drop in temperature so profound it felt as if the very heat of Ra's light was being siphoned away. The golden glow of the sun god, which had moments before illuminated the cavernous darkness, began to flicker, to dim, as if a great shadow was falling over it. The water of the Duat, usually a black, sluggish current, stopped moving. It became still, dead still. Then it began to ripple. Not from a breeze, for there was no air to move, but from something deep below. A tremor, a vibration that ran through the hull of the Barque and into the very bones of the gods. It was a low guttural hum that grew in intensity until it was a physical pressure, a feeling that the entire underworld was groaning in anticipation. And then the darkness ahead of them began to congeal. It was no longer just the absence of light. It was becoming a substance, a thick, oily blackness that was darker than dark. From the depths of this absolute void, 2 points of light appeared. But they were not lights that illuminated. They were lights that consumed. They were eyes. Eyes the size of moons, filled not with malice or hatred, but with a chilling cosmic indifference. They were the eyes of anti-existence, the cold, dead stare of the void given form. The river began to churn, not with waves, but with immense, coiling shapes moving just beneath the surface. The scale was impossible to comprehend. The coils were thicker than mountains, longer than rivers. This wasn't a creature moving through the water. The creature was the water. It was the riverbed, the canyon walls, the very substance of the underworld's abyss. Slowly, a head rose from the black water. It was a serpent's head, but to call it that is to call a supernova a campfire. Its scales were plates of obsidian, each one the size of a kingdom, and the sound they made scraping against each other was the grinding of tectonic plates. When it opened its mouth, it was not a hiss that emerged, but a sound that was the antithesis of creation, a roar of pure entropy that threatened to unmake the very laws of physics. This was Apep, the serpent of chaos, the eater of the sun. He wasn't just a monster in the Duat, he was the Duat. He was the embodiment of the chaos that existed before creation, the infinite, mindless hunger to return everything to the featureless nothing from which it came. He didn't hate. Hate is a complex emotion. Apep was a cosmic principle. A black hole doesn't hate the star it consumes. It simply is. His hypnotic gaze fell upon the Barque, and the light of Ra dimmed further. The other gods felt a cold dread creep into their divine hearts, a primal fear that was alien to them. This wasn't a battle for a throne or for glory. This was a battle for the right to exist. But as the shadow of Apep fell over them, one god did not flinch. One god stepped forward, planting his feet firmly on the prow of the ship, his knuckles white on the shaft of his celestial spear. Set, the outcast, the violent one, the god whose own nature flirted with chaos, stared into the abyss. And the abyss stared back. He let out a roar of his own, the cry of a desert storm, a sound of raw, untamable power. It was a challenge. Order against chaos. Storm against the void. In the flickering light of the dying sun, the champion of the gods braced himself as the world serpent lunged. The impact was not a sound. It was an absence of sound, a moment where all of existence held its breath. Set's spear, a weapon forged from the heart of a thunderstorm, met the obsidian scales of the serpent. For a split second there was only pressure, the force of a hurricane against the inertia of a mountain. Then reality shattered. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from the point of contact, boiling the black waters of the Duat and sending the lesser gods on the barge reeling. The air itself seemed to tear, screaming in protest. Apep did not flinch. The spear, which could splinter mountains, only scraped a shower of black sparks from his hide. The serpent's head, a battering ram the size of a temple, slammed into the prow of the solar barge. Wood, gilded and blessed by 1,000 priests, splintered like kindling. The entire vessel groaned, threatening to capsize into the abyssal waters. This was not a fight of skill or finesse. It was a collision of fundamental forces. Set, a being of focused, violent rage, against Apep, the embodiment of unraveling, mindless entropy. Set was thrown back by the impact, his feet skidding across the deck. But he was the god of storms. He was made of this kind of violence. He landed in a crouch, his red eyes burning with a furious light. He roared again, and this time the sky of the underworld answered. Though there was no sun, no clouds, lightning crackled around him, arcing from his body and striking Apep's coils. The serpent hissed, a sound like grinding continents, more annoyed than injured. This was Apep's greatest strength. Physical attacks were almost meaningless. How do you injure a being that is the embodiment of nothingness? It's like trying to punch a hole in the dark. But Set had one advantage. The other gods, paragons of Ma'at, of divine order, were terrified of Apep. They saw in him the end of everything they were. Set, the outcast, the violent one, the god who murdered his own brother, he was not a creature of perfect order. He understood chaos. He wasn't afraid to look into the abyss, because a part of the abyss looked back from him. While Set held the front line, the other gods enacted their own desperate defense. Isis, her voice a low, powerful chant, wove spells of protection around the barge, her words glowing in the air like ethereal hieroglyphs, forming a shimmering barrier that sizzled and popped as it touched Apep's skin. Thoth, the scribe of the gods, recited ancient, forbidden names from his scrolls, words of power that caused the very water of the underworld to recoil from the serpent, creating a small, clear space around the boat. From the stern, archer deities loosed arrows tipped with solidified sunlight, tiny pinpricks of hope against an ocean of despair. But it was all a holding action. They were trying to reinforce reality while Apep simply tried to erase it. The serpent ignored them, his baleful, hypnotic eyes fixed on one target, the glowing form of Ra, huddled and ancient in the center of the barge. To Apep, Ra wasn't just a king or a god. He was a symbol. He was the sun, the source of light, life, and order. He was the ultimate validation that existence was better than non-existence. And for that, Apep hated him with a passion as cold and infinite as space. Apep opened his maw. It was not a mouth of flesh and teeth, but a gateway into oblivion. A soul-crushing vortex of absolute cold and silence began to pull at the barge. The protective spells of Isis flickered and died. The arrows of light were swallowed by the darkness. The gods cried out in terror, their divine forms beginning to waver, to lose cohesion, as if the concept of their own existence was being forgotten. This was Apep's true weapon. The uncreation, the power to simply make things not be. Ra, the sun god, began to dim. The light that held back the eternal night of the Duat faltered. This was it, the moment of cosmic failure. But as the other gods fell to their knees, paralyzed by the sheer horror of the void, Set stood his ground. He felt the pull, the promise of sweet, silent oblivion. It tugged at his very essence, whispering to him that all his rage, all his struggle was meaningless. It offered him peace. And Set laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound, full of scorn and defiance. Peace? He was the god of the raging storm, the merciless desert, the blood-soaked battlefield. Peace was an insult. He thrived on struggle. He was defined by conflict. He looked into the gaping void of Apep's mouth, a sight that could unmake a lesser god's sanity, and he saw not an end, but an opponent worthy of his full, untamed fury. He planted his feet, the deck of the barge cracking under the strain, and leaned into the vortex. "You offer nothing because you are nothing," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the soul-stealing silence. "I am the storm. I am the fury of the sand and sky. I am something." He channeled every ounce of his being, all his rage, his jealousy, his violent strength into his spear. It began to glow, not with the pure golden light of Ra, but with a blood-red chaotic energy. It was the color of a desert sunset, the color of a wound, the color of life fighting desperately against the encroaching dark. With a final world-breaking roar, he charged forward, running straight towards the maw of oblivion. He was a streak of red fury against the absolute black. The other gods watched, their fear momentarily replaced by awe. This was why Set was on the barge. Not because he was noble or righteous, but because in the face of absolute chaos, only a rival chaos could stand against it. He leaped from the prow of the boat, a god-sized projectile of pure defiance, and plunged his spear not into Apep's flesh, but into the very concept of his unmaking gaze. He stabbed at the vortex itself. There was a sound that cannot be described, a shriek of physics being violated. The vortex of nothingness faltered. The crushing silence was replaced by a roar of agony from the serpent. For the first time, Apep felt a pain that was more than physical. Set had not just wounded his body. He had attacked his very nature. He had asserted the power of existence over non-existence with a single furious blow. The great serpent recoiled, its massive head whipping back from the barge. The hypnotic spell was broken. The pull of the void ceased. Ra's light flared back to life, pushing back the oppressive gloom. Apep, thrashing in the dark water, let out a hiss of frustrated rage. A deep, miles-long gash of crimson energy pulsed on his snout where the spear had struck, a wound that burned with the stubborn, chaotic energy of the storm god. It would not kill him. Nothing could truly kill the void. But it was a defeat. It was a searing reminder that for all his power, existence would not surrender quietly. Beaten back, the Lord of Chaos sank beneath the black waves, disappearing into the depths from which he came. Silence returned to the Duat, but it was a different silence now. It was not the oppressive silence of the void, but the weary silence of survival. On the deck of the solar barge, the gods slowly picked themselves up, their forms solidifying once more. They looked at Set, who stood panting on the damaged prow, his spear still glowing with a faint red light. He was no hero. He was a killer, a kinslayer, a force of destruction. But tonight, that destruction had been aimed outward, and it had saved them all. The barge, battered but intact, began to move forward once more. continuing its perilous journey toward the dawn. The battle was won, but the night was far from over, and in the deep, dark waters, chaos was already beginning to heal. The silence that followed the serpent's retreat was heavier, somehow, than the chaos of the battle. It was a dead, ringing silence, filled with the scent of ozone and celestial blood. On the deck of the barge of a million years, the gods took a collective, shuddering breath. Seth stood panting, his spear still dripping with the black ichor of chaos. His eyes, once burning with the red fury of the desert storm, now held a weary glint. He had done it. He had turned back the tide. But every god on that barge knew the truth. This was not an end. It was an intermission. For Apep could not be killed. Not in any permanent sense. This was a truth as fundamental as the rising of the sun itself. To destroy Apep would be to destroy a core concept of existence. The ancient Egyptians understood the universe as a delicate, eternal balance between two opposing forces, Ma'at and Isfet. Ma'at was order, truth, justice, the divine harmony that made the stars move in their courses and the Nile flood its banks with life-giving precision. Ra was the ultimate champion of Ma'at. Isfet was its opposite. It was chaos, lies, injustice, and the uncreation that constantly gnawed at the edges of the ordered world. Isfet was the void from which all things came, and the void to which all things could return. And Apep was its ultimate embodiment. He was not simply a snake. He was the concept of chaos given form. He was entropy in a universe striving for structure. You could no more kill Apep than you could kill the concept of darkness by shining a light. The moment the light fades, the darkness is simply there, waiting. To destroy him utterly would be to unmake the universe, to create an imbalance so profound that creation itself would collapse. The gods were not fighting to eradicate chaos. They were fighting to contain it. They were fighting to keep it at bay for one more night, to ensure that it did not swallow the light of creation whole. It was an eternal, exhausting, and necessary war. Every slash of a sword, every blast of divine power was a pushback, a reinforcement of the fragile walls of reality. They were buying time, one night at a time, for eternity, and they were not fighting alone. As the barge of Ra sailed through the darkest sectors of the Duat, a parallel battle was being waged on Earth, in the world of the living. All across the land of Egypt, in the hushed, incense-filled temples that lined the Nile, priests were awake. They knew the sun god was in his greatest peril, and they had their own weapons to bring to bear. This was not a war fought only by gods. It was a cosmic struggle that required the participation of humanity. The priests engaged in rituals of immense sympathetic magic, designed to lend their strength to Ra and weaken his great enemy. The most powerful of these ceremonies was known as the banishing of Apep. Inside torchlit sanctuaries, priests would fashion effigies of the great serpent. Sometimes they were drawn on papyrus, in green or black ink. Other times they were modeled from wax, their serpentine forms crafted with meticulous detail. Upon these figures, the priests would write Apep's name, a name that itself held power, a name they sought to defile and destroy. Then the rituals would begin. The effigies were spat upon. They were trampled underfoot. They were stabbed with ritual knives, the priests chanting ancient, powerful incantations with every blow. The spells were recorded in sacred texts, one of the most famous being the Book of Overthrowing Apep, a collection of magical warfare instructions. The words spoken were not mere prayers. They were commands, declarations of magical power intended to have a direct, tangible effect in the underworld. Fall upon your face, Apep, enemy of Ra. The fire of the eye of Horus devours you. Your name shall be blotted out. Your memory shall be erased from the heavens and the earth. You are cursed, you are felled, you are finished. The wax figures would be thrown into fires, their forms melting and contorting as the priests chanted, believing that as the wax effigy was destroyed on earth, the real Apep would be burned and weakened in the Duat. The papyrus drawings were similarly burned, the smoke carrying the curse into the ether. It was a spiritual assault, a magical barrage launched from the world of the living into the heart of the underworld, a testament to the belief that the actions of mortals could tip the scales in a battle between gods. Every curse uttered, every effigy destroyed, was another spear in Seth's hand, another shield for Ra's light. Back on the celestial barge, the crew felt it, a subtle surge of power, a warmth that pushed back against the oppressive cold of the Duat. It was the belief of their people, a river of devotion and magical intent flowing from the waking world. reinforcing their divine will. The gashes in the hull of the barge seemed to mend themselves faster. The light from Ra's form, which had dimmed in the struggle, now began to pulse with renewed intensity. They were approaching the 8th gate of the night. This was a place of transformation, guarded by fearsome gods with knives. But as they drew closer, a strange stillness fell over the river of darkness. The groaning and hissing of the underworld's denizens faded away. Even the water itself seemed to grow unnaturally placid, like a sheet of black glass. The frontal assault had failed. The brute force attack had been repelled. But chaos is not a one-trick beast. Isfet is insidious. If it cannot break the door down, it will seep through the cracks. If it cannot win by strength, it will win by stealth. A thick, disorienting fog began to rise from the still water, coiling around the barge like ghostly serpents. It was no ordinary mist. It was a fog of doubt, of despair. It carried whispers that sounded like the wind but spoke of failure. It clung to the gods, cold and damp, seeping into their minds. Thoth, the wise ibis-headed god of knowledge, looked at his sacred scrolls, and for a fleeting moment, the hieroglyphs seemed to twist into symbols of nonsense, mocking his wisdom. Horus, the falcon god, looked out into the gloom, and his famously sharp eyes saw phantom shapes in the mist, illusions of victory turning to dust, of kingdoms falling. Apep was not attacking the barge anymore. He was attacking the minds of its crew. He was weaving a tapestry of fear and illusion, using the very nature of the Duat against them. The underworld was a place where thought and reality were perilously close, where a moment of doubt could manifest as a real physical threat. The serpent's influence was turning the journey inward, forcing each god to confront their own deepest anxieties. Ra, shielded within his cabin, felt the shift. The nature of the assault had changed from a physical threat to an existential one. This was, in many ways, more dangerous. A spear could be dodged, a bite could be blocked. But how do you fight a shadow in your own mind? How do you defeat an enemy that makes you question the very purpose of your journey? The barge drifted silently toward the 8th gate, now shrouded in the whispering fog. The crew stood on deck, weapons ready, but their eyes darted nervously, not at the river, but at each other, at the shadows in the corners of their vision. The silence was now the most terrifying weapon of all. The roar of the serpent had been replaced by the whisper of despair. Apep had been wounded, yes, but chaos was far from defeated. It had simply changed its form. And in the oppressive, unnatural quiet, the gods knew the next attack was coming. They just had no idea what it would be, or where it would come from. The silence that followed was a weapon in itself. It was deeper and more absolute than the simple absence of sound. It was a void, a crushing pressure that pressed in on the solar barque, suffocating thought, breeding suspicion. The gods stood at their posts, their knuckles white on the shafts of their spears and the hilts of their blades, but their eyes were not fixed on the black waters of the Duat. They were fixed on each other. When the enemy is a roar and a storm of fangs, you know where to stand, where to fight. But when the enemy is a profound and terrifying quiet, the battlefield shifts. It moves from the world outside to the world within. Set was the first to feel the change. His entire existence was a balance of violence and purpose. He was the storm, but a storm deployed in defense of order. Now, with no enemy to face, the storm began to churn inside him. He felt the gazes of the other gods like insects crawling on his skin. He saw how Horus kept a hand near his khopesh, how Isis's brow furrowed whenever he shifted his weight. They didn't trust him. They never had. He was a necessary evil to them, a rabid dog they pointed at a greater threat. The thought wasn't his own, yet it felt as true as the spear in his hand. It whispered to him from the silent water, a venomous hiss that bypassed the ears and went straight to the soul. They fear you, the silence said. Asterisk, they will betray you the moment I am gone. Why do you protect those who despise you? Asterisk. Thoth, the master of knowledge, found his own mind turning against him. He reviewed the celestial maps, the calculations for the sun's trajectory, the ancient schematics of the Barque itself. But where there was once elegant certainty, he now found only flaws. Every equation seemed to hide a fatal error. Every star chart predicted a collision. His wisdom, once a boundless ocean, had become a prison of terrifying possibilities. The silence mocked his intellect. You see every path, scribe, it whispered, the words forming in the endless columns of his mental library. Asterisk, and every single one leads to failure. Your knowledge is not a light. It is a detailed map of the coming darkness. You know you are doomed. Why pretend otherwise? Asterisk. Isis, the great magician, felt her power fray at the edges. The protective ward she wove around the bark flickered like dying candlelight. Her incantations, words of power that could bind demons and heal gods, now felt hollow, like a child's nursery rhyme recited against a hurricane. She looked at Ra, her beloved father, and saw not a divine king but a frail old man, his light fading, his body trembling. Despair, cold and absolute, coiled in her heart. Your magic is a lie, the silence hummed, a dissonant chord in the music of creation. Asterisk. You weave threads of hope, but the universe is a tapestry of unraveling ends. You cannot save him. You cannot save any of them. Asterisk. And Ra, the center of it all, felt the weariness of a billion journeys settle into his very bones. Each night this same battle. Each dawn a victory that meant nothing, for the enemy was eternal. Apep could not be killed. Chaos could not be destroyed. So what was the point? The cycle was not a journey of renewal. It was a sentence, an eternal condemnation to fight a war that could never ever be won. The light that emanated from him, the very force that held the cosmos together, began to dim. Not from a wound, but from a profound and all-consuming exhaustion. The dawn is not a promise, the silence sighed, its breath cold on his divine spirit. Asterisk. It is a postponement of the inevitable. The true peace is not in the light, but in the final dreamless dark. Let go. It is time to rest. Asterisk. The tension on the bark became unbearable. Set's frustration finally boiled over. He slammed the butt of his spear against the deck, the sound cracking through the silence like a thunderclap. What are you all staring at? He snarled, his red eyes blazing. Is there a traitor you wish to point out? Horus stepped forward, his own falcon eyes narrowed. Your paranoia is unbecoming, uncle. We are all on edge. Control yourself. Control. Set laughed, a harsh grating sound. That's rich, coming from you. You, who would have torn Egypt apart to satisfy your own vengeance. You speak of control, yet you watch me, waiting for me to prove your darkest assumptions correct. Enough. Isis's voice cut through the argument, but it lacked its usual authority. It was strained, brittle. Fighting amongst ourselves is exactly what the serpent wants. And how do you know what it wants? Thoth interjected, his voice sharp with a frantic energy. He held up a scroll covered in frantic, overlapping calculations. According to every known variable, our continued existence is a statistical impossibility. We are not fighting a battle. We are living out a rounding error in the equation of the cosmos. To argue is as pointless as to fight. The unity of the gods, the single most powerful force against the chaos of the Duat, was shattering. They were no longer a crew. They were a collection of isolated fears, trapped together on a dying star. This was Apep's new form. Not a monster of flesh and scale, but a poison of the mind, a contagion of despair. It had bypassed their weapons, their magic, their divine strength, and struck directly at their spirit. Apep didn't need to devour the sun if he could convince the sun to extinguish itself. Ra slumped on his throne. His golden skin seemed dull, his radiant aura shrinking until it was barely aglow. He was giving up. The whispers had won. He was letting go of the cycle, accepting the final peaceful dark. As the light of creation itself began to die, the gods stopped their bickering. They turned to see their king, their father, fading before their eyes. Horror, true and absolute, eclipsed their petty squabbles. This was it. The end. Not with a cataclysmic battle, but with a quiet, weary surrender. But in that moment of ultimate despair, as the last rays of Ra's light cast long, dying shadows across the deck, Isis saw it. In the reflection on Thoth's polished ibis-head staff, she didn't just see the dimming light of Ra. She saw a faint oily shimmer in the air around them, a subtle distortion like heat haze. It clung to them, to their weapons, to their very thoughts. It was a venom not of the body but of the soul. It's not us, she breathed, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. It's him, his essence. We've been breathing it in. Thoth's eyes widened, the frantic energy replaced by dawning comprehension. He looked at his impossible equations. The variables, they weren't wrong. They were poisoned. Set looked down at his trembling hands, the rage in his heart suddenly feeling foreign, artificial. The whispers. They all understood at once. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. It was full of Apep. He had been defeated physically, so he had become a plague, an infection of hopelessness. He had turned their own minds into weapons against them. As they looked at each other, seeing not rivals or traitors but fellow victims of a psychic assault, a new sound finally broke the silence. It was not a whisper. It was a low, deep thrumming that vibrated up through the hull of the Barque. It was the sound of immense satisfaction, of a predator that knows its prey is finally cornered, its will to fight finally broken. They turned as one to the black waters. The unnatural quiet was gone, replaced by this growing triumphant hum. And from the abyssal depths a shadow began to rise. It was larger than before, swollen with the despair it had fed upon. The gods had been so busy fighting the shadows in their own minds, they hadn't noticed the greatest shadow of all gathering right beneath their feet. Apep, drawn forth by their discord and the fading light of Ra, was ascending for the final kill. The primordial waters of the Duat didn't just stir. They boiled. The very fabric of non-existence screamed as a form of impossible size and darkness began to uncoil. This was not the serpent of the nightly skirmishes. This was Apep unbound, gorged on the discord of the gods, empowered by the dimming of the sun. His scales were the crushing void between stars, his eyes were dying galaxies, and his hiss was the sound of cosmic silence, the end of all things. On the deck of the Mesectet barge, the bickering gods fell silent. The petty grievances, the ancient rivalries, the wounds of pride, they all evaporated like mist in the face of this absolute oblivion. They saw not an enemy to be defeated, but an ending to be endured. For the first time, Horus felt a tremor of fear that had nothing to do with his uncle Set. Isis, mistress of magic, felt her spells unravel in her mind before she could even utter them. And Thoth, the scribe of reality, saw the hieroglyphs of the universe begin to blur and fade. Apep's colossal head rose above the barge, blotting out what little light remained. His gaze fell upon the weakened, flickering form of Ra, and in that gaze was a hunger that had been building since before time began. This was his moment, the end of the cycle, the great unmaking. But then something shifted. Started with Set, the god of chaos, the murderer, the outcast. He looked at the encroaching void of Apep, and he saw not an ally, but a mockery of his own domain. Set's chaos was the storm that tests the strength of the tree, the desert that forges the survivor. It was a force of violent, unpredictable change within creation. Apep was the erasure of creation itself, and in that moment of terrible clarity, Set understood. He let out a roar that was pure, untamed fury and hefted his spear. He, the renegade, was the first to stand before the fading sun god, a defiant shield of muscle and rage. His stand was a spark. It ignited the divine fire in the others. Horus, seeing his eternal rival defend his great-grandfather, raised his own khopesh, his falcon eyes blazing with a new light. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the killer of his father, not as enemies, but as the twin poles of order and chaos, united against the nothingness that would consume them both. Isis and Nephthys began to weave their magic together, their voices a harmonized chant that pushed back against the deafening silence of the void. The Ennead, the great council of gods, for a single desperate moment was whole again. They remembered what they were fighting for, not just their own power, not just their king, but for the very concept of being. For color, for sound, for warmth, for life. The battle that followed was not a battle of gods against a monster. It was a battle of existence against its own cancellation. Apep didn't just bite and constrict. He unmade. Where his shadow fell, the divine ichor of the gods turned to dust. The sound of his roar didn't just intimidate, it erased memories. But the gods fought back with the full fury of a universe refusing to die. Set was a whirlwind of violence at the prow, his spear glowing with desert heat. Horus was a blur of righteous vengeance, his blade cutting arcs of starlight. Thoth uttered words of power that rewrote the laws of physics around the barge, creating shields of pure logic. Isis unleashed spells that wove the threads of fate into nets, momentarily ensnaring the great serpent. Yet it wasn't enough. Apep was too vast, too powerful. He was the sum of all their fears, the embodiment of their disunity. The barge splintered. Ra's light grew so faint it was barely a candle flame in a hurricane. They were losing. And then from the world of the living a new power emerged. On the banks of the Nile, in temples of granite and sandstone, The priests had seen the signs. The sun was failing. The world was teetering on the brink. And so, they did what they had always done. They began the rituals. They lit the sacred fires, they chanted the ancient hymns, they made the offerings. Millions of voices, from the highest priest to the humblest farmer, rose up in a chorus of belief. They weren't just praying to Ra. They were praying for him. They were pouring their collective hope, their belief in the dawn, their faith in the order of the cosmos, into their fading god. This wave of human faith, of Ma'at reaffirmed, washed over the Duat. It was a force Apep could not understand. He was born of the void, of isolation and nothingness. The power of millions of souls, united in a single purpose, was anathema to him. The light of Ra, fed by this immense surge of mortal belief, did not just flicker back to life. It exploded. It erupted from the old god in a wave of incandescent creation. The darkness that Apep had cast over everything was burned away. The serpent recoiled, hissing in agony, blinded by the pure, concentrated power of a universe that believed in itself. In that brilliant, blinding moment, the united gods struck as one. Every spear, every sword, every spell, every ounce of divine power was focused into a single devastating blow. They didn't just strike the serpent's body, they struck the very idea of him. They reinforced the boundary between what is and what is not. Apep was not killed. You cannot kill the void. You cannot destroy nothingness. But he was defeated. He was driven back, wounded and broken, into the deepest, darkest trenches of the primordial ocean. He was chained once more by divine magic and mortal faith, forced to retreat into the abyss where he would brood and heal, waiting for the next moment of weakness, the next lapse in vigilance. As the last echo of his scream faded, a profound silence fell upon the battered Mesectet barge. And then, a single ray of light broke the horizon. The sun was rising. Ra, weary but whole, stood tall once more, his light washing over a wounded but victorious pantheon. The eternal cycle had been preserved. Dawn had come. This is the ultimate legacy of Apep. He is more than just a mythological serpent. He is a symbol for one of the most profound truths the ancient Egyptians understood: that chaos is not an invading force, but the default state of the universe. Order, light, life, and consciousness, these are not the given. They are the exception. They are the victory. They are the project we are all engaged in every single day. Apep is the entropy that pulls at the stars and wears down the mountains. He is the voice of despair in the dead of night that tells you to give up. He is the nihilism that whispers that nothing matters. He is the random, senseless tragedy that strikes without warning. He is the force that seeks to unmake, to unravel, to return everything to the silent, thoughtless dark. And Ra's journey on the solar barge? That's the answer. It is the conscious, daily, unending effort required to hold that darkness at bay. It is the choice to get out of bed in the morning. It is the act of creating art, of building a home, of raising a child, of learning something new. It is the decision to come together, to mend what is broken, to hope in the face of despair. Every time we choose order over chaos, connection over isolation, meaning over nothingness, we are a god on that barge fighting alongside Ra. The Egyptians didn't believe Apep could ever be truly destroyed, and perhaps that is their most vital piece of wisdom. The fight is never over. The potential for chaos is always there, coiled in the darkness beneath our feet. But the lesson of the myth is not one of futility. It is one of immense, defiant hope. It tells us that the dawn is not a guarantee. It is an achievement. It's a victory we must earn again and again. The serpent never truly dies, but neither does the sun. And the choice of which one you feed, which one you fight for, is made with every breath, every action, every single day. It is the oldest battle in the universe, and it is happening inside of you right now.